So then let's start. Good morning to everyone here in the room at the EPC, very welcome, and also to our participants online. Welcome to our hybrid policy dialogue, Cleaner Air, Time to Capture the Benefits, organized by the European Policy Center and kindly supported by the Clean Air Fund. My name is Melanie Fessler. I'm policy analyst at the EPC, and I will be moderating today's discussion. This event for us is also the occasion to present to you our fresh off the press discussion paper. We also have printout copies where we entitled Towards a Cleaner Air in Europe, Time for a Stronger Vision and More Action, where we explored how the benefits of cleaner air could be better harnessed across different policies and sectors. As we all know, air pollution is harmful to our health and well-being, but also to our environment and the economy. It does not only lead to multiple diseases and hundreds of thousands of premature deaths every year, it also damages ecosystems and biodiversity, contributes to global warming, and impacts our society on many levels. This makes Europe lose hundreds of billions of euros a year, according to the World Health Organization. And air pollution levels across Europe keep exceeding current EU standards and the stricter World Health Organization guidelines. On the good side of things, there is growing awareness about the problem, but still the benefits of cleaner air and the cost of air pollution are rarely reflected in policymaking and investment decisions. So we thought now, as decisions are taken in the face of multiple crises, and there are the discussions ongoing about the revision of the Ambient Air Quality Directive, we think it's high time to act. Therefore, today we want to reflect about the state of play in creating an ambitious and credible framework for cleaner air. Therefore, we will look at the role of the EU, but also the member states and other stakeholders in these efforts. And we will pay special attention to the role of different policies and sectors, including energy, industry, transport and mobility, but also agriculture in delivering on cleaner air. And to start off, let me introduce you to our panel. We are very delighted to have with us Veronica Manfredi, Director for Zero Pollution in the Directorate General for Environment from the European Commission. With us is also my colleague, Stefan Sipka, Senior Policy Analyst at the EPC, who will present the findings of our project. Joining us online is Niall McLoughlin. I hope I didn't massacre your name too much. Principal Officer in the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications from the Government of Ireland. Very welcome. Very happy to also welcome Gillian Holmes, Program Director of the Clean Air Fund. And also joining us online is Anne Stauffer, Deputy Director of the Health and Environment Alliance. And we are very happy to also have two respondents to the panel. Again, joining us online is Robert Kelly, Deputy Director for Air Solutions and Lead Expert on Air Quality from Suez. Hello. And in the room, very welcome, Lena Forsman, Policy Officer at the Gothenburg European Office. Both of them will react to the introductory remarks of all of our panelists before we then open the floor to a discussion with you in the audience and also with the online participants. And on this, I already wanted to say that those of you participating online can, of course, also ask questions. Please just make sure to put them in the Q&A box, and you can already start writing them now so that I can take them on later. I also need to mention that this event is a hybrid policy dialogue, therefore it will be recorded. And now, without any further ado, I'm happy to give you the floor, Veronica, for your introductory statement.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and good morning to all of you here in the room and online. It's really a wonderful opportunity to connect the dots, as we always must do. Colleagues, I don't think I need to repeat it once again, but clean air is simply essential because our health, our environment, our whole economy clearly depend on it. But I also think that it's becoming a little bit tautologically to repeat again and again and again, as we do since too many years, that air pollution still today remains the #1 cause of environmentally linked diseases. It has, maybe this figure is less known to the majority, a cost to society, which is largely hidden for the reason you just said, Melanie, that ranges between 230 up to 850 billion per year. As you can imagine, when the population is confronted with diseases that can range from, a simple, so to say, bronchitis up to lung cancers, 25% are attributable to air pollution. This has an impact also on the way in which the economy and the society work, and not to mention all the hidden costs to our public health system, of which we discuss so often. What is worse, and in this room we all know it far too well, is that the vulnerable groups are the ones that are affected the most, starting with children, going to the elderly, the victims of so many COVID-19 cases, as we know, poorer people, and those with pre-existing medical conditions. So in the European Commission, we have no doubt, and we are happy to be with you to discuss that it is really high time to set new air quality standards, not just for our health, for our economies, but also because we need to reduce these hidden, but still very much, I would say, per se, are stabilizing inequalities. I suppose you've all read and seen that the Commission has recently adopted a new communication on mental health, which comes up with the finding that 1 in 6 citizens across the European Union is today facing mental health issues. I find this data very telling because it speaks of something that goes beyond what could be, simply genetically transmitted issues and so on. There is something rotten in the environment in which we move, I'm pretty convinced. So, because we are convinced of the need for action, we have adopted on the 26th of October 2022 a very clear and I think sufficiently ambitious proposal for a revised Ambient Air Quality Directive. It focuses on 4 policy areas. So first of all, it proposes a long-term zero pollution objective for air for 2050. Not in splendid isolation, but very much building on the efforts that we are doing in the climate neutrality area. As we know, a very large chunk of the sources of air pollution are the same that we are tackling in order to limit greenhouse gases. This objective includes clear and precise EU air quality standards for 12 pollutants to be attained as a first step by the year 2030. We will keep them under regular review, taking societal, economic, and technological developments into account. Our ambition is essentially to drive the EU to stay on a trajectory towards the zero pollution goal by 2050. Second, we have proposed clearer rules on governance and on enforcement. The proposals requires indeed air quality plans to be more effective in preventing or putting an end to exceedances of EU standards. And this includes very important provisions on access to justice, compensation for health damages, and penalties. The new provisions entail indeed a clear legal basis, I would say for the first time, for people whose health has been damaged by air pollution to seek compensation also through collective redress, relying on civil society organizations who can legitimately act in their name and behalf, as it is already the case for competition, consumer, data protection laws that we have across the Union. Second, the penalty clause has been revamped to include fines for those who pollute, which have to be proportionate to the turnover of the person responsible, so that no economic benefit is drawn from these breaches. Again, very much in line with competition, consumer, data protection law. If we protect so well the economic interests of our citizens, maybe time also to have similar protection for their lungs. We want to improve, this is my third pillar, rules for air quality monitoring to measure also lower levels of concentration, use modeling more, and make it mandatory to monitor air pollutants of emerging concern. And clearly here we are thinking of ultrafine particles, we are thinking of black carbon, of ammonia. As you know, on some of them, we still don't have final recommendations and guidelines by the WHO, but we collectively agree with the WHO, of course, that we have to continue keeping them under close monitoring. And fourth pillar, we want to inform better the citizens, the policymakers, each of us, about air quality, also by including more up-to-date information on possible health impacts. Now, the impact assessment that underpins our legislative proposal attests to the complexity of the challenge we have in front of us. We have been taking into account the different sources of air pollution, and typically energy, transport, agriculture, industrial production as such, as well as the different levels of governance and policies which are involved. The impact assessment essentially shows how much we have already reduced air pollution and health impacts. And this is an important thing I want to underline, because often when we deal with this topic, we have the impression, oh my God, we repeat it again and nothing has moved. No. We have to know that we have been able to drive the prosperity of our continent, because if we compare where we were in the early 90s, where we are witnessing every year 1 million premature deaths, we can self-congratulate ourselves for having driven a type of economic model where now this number has gone down by 2/3, 300,000. But it's still an absolutely unacceptable high number every year, a number that puts in tragic perspective even the number of appalling deaths we have experienced during the, after all, just 2 years of COVID-19 pandemic. This goes on and on. Most importantly, our impact assessment shows that what we can achieve in the next decades. Our impact assessment really gives you all the facts and figures to show that if uptaken swiftly by the co-legislator, the revised directive, building upon ongoing efforts, would reduce by 50% the health impacts as compared to now, and contribute to reduce by more than 75% the premature death due to air pollution levels, and which are above the WHO recommendations. So we also are aware that implementing the new directive, of course, would come with a cost. We estimate it to be at around 6 billion per year. May I underline that this is a fraction of the expected benefits. Benefits expected to be 7 times higher, not to mention the hidden cost to society that I just mentioned, 230, 80, 50 billion, depending on the areas. So you understand that we're talking about an extremely positive cost-benefit analysis in favor of acting. Finally, our impact assessment shows that even if the proposed air quality standards can clearly be achieved in most areas of Europe, there are some specific areas, some more difficulties will be faced due, for example, to specific meteorological or orographic conditions. Our take is that we're talking about 6% of the entire European Union territory. This means that our proposal for these specific areas provides for additional time to comply with air quality standards, provided that certain conditions are met, which essentially boil down to securing that these areas have very clear air quality plans about how they intend to progressively deal with these exceedances. We do recognize that implementing the new directive will require efforts across the board, across sectors, and this, of course, includes tackling emissions at source. On our side, we feel we have largely delivered. We have presented ambitious proposals to tackle emissions in the industry, in the energy, in the transport sectors. We have boosted the funds for clean air for the coming years. An estimated 147 billion euro are available for clean air, directly or indirectly, in the 2021-2027 funding period, which represents around 8% of the old multi-annual financial framework. And may I say, it is still just a fraction of the entire cake, because a lot of what we're doing for climate neutrality, over 20% of the multi-annual financial framework, also co-delivers for air pollution. We are also supporting local authorities through different urban initiatives, such as the Green City Accord, the awards of the European Green Capital and European Green Leaf, very holistic in their scope of application, and of course the EU mission on climate neutral and smart cities. Finally, we want to make sure that all those who need to act on clean air keep in touch, exchange their experiences, coordinate. This is the reason why also this year, on the 23rd and 24th of November, we will gather for the 4th Clean Air Forum. This time it will happen in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. Not only you're all very warmly invited, but we can anticipate that we will have with us really a large group of clean air stakeholders, interest parties from across European Union, industry, civil society, scientific community at high level, discussing over several days on key topics and key challenges to coordinate the way in which we improve. finally, this is not happening in splendid isolation. This is part indeed of a broader effort. I brought for all of you a copy of the Zero Pollution Monitoring and Outlook report. The name of the game is not about imposing impossible and unrealistic goals, it's about changing in an holistic manner, simultaneously, making sure that that €1 we spend co-delivers for air, water, and soil greenhouse gases at the same time. So it's a huge agenda for technological innovation. And I'm convinced that together we can make it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Veronica, for this comprehensive overview, not only on the Commission proposal and its ambitions, but also for underlining the existing territorial and societal inequalities when it comes to air pollution, and for stressing, again, that the benefit largely outweighs the cost, as you mentioned, the cost-benefit analysis. And on that, Stefan, very happy over to you to present us the findings of our discussion paper.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and happy to share some of our key findings with you that from our paper that's been published on this very day on towards a cleaner air in Europe, time for a stronger vision and more action. We also, by the way, we have the printouts, so those who are present in person, that's the perks of being physical participants, so you can have access, you can take the hard copy with you, see this paper, but it's also available online now already. So of course you can see all of the detailed findings of our paper there, but here I can say a bit more. I say taking a bigger picture. I am the author of this paper, but also together with a number of also other authors, so including Melanie, also Daniel Brady, and Simon Dequerel, and with contributions from Annika Hedberg. So they're all members of the EPC team. This paper is. This is how we try to. The paper was basically summarizing our research and our work under this project, Cleaner Air, Time to Capture the Benefits, that we've been running since last year with kind support from the Clean Air Fund. Basically, we organized a workshop beginning of February to set the scene for further research that basically led to this discussion paper. And if we try to visualize our take on the matter, this is how we try to look at it in a holistic way. So we do have different sources of air pollution, especially we highlighted here agriculture, energy, industry, mobility, and transport that emit a long list of pollutants that some of them are familiar are sulfur oxides, nitrates, particulate matter, but others that make a significant impact on different sectors and aspects of our lives and our economy and society. We lose hundreds of billions of euros every year because of air pollution, the health effects, and of course, hundreds of thousands of lives. People die prematurely despite the progress being made. That is still the case. And if that is not enough, consider the economic cost. So if we have people who are ill, that of course impacts our productivity. And what is of course really sad is that the vulnerable groups are impacted the most. So lower income groups, marginalized groups, and so forth. So that's why we need policies. So the box to your right, so that we need policies to help us prevent air pollution, to address it when it happens, and to minimize the damage. And there we have the Green Deal, of course, as the overarching framework, but then the zero pollution strategy, and then more specifically, the Ambient Air Quality Directive currently being revised, the NEC Directive, but also, last but not the least, sectorial legislation, because in the end we need to look at the particular sectors. That's where the emissions come in, and they need to be. We need to look at them more closely. So more or less, that's the structure that's how we try to imagine this, and more or less you will come across these themes and topics throughout the paper. But of course, there are challenges. If we look at more horizontally, currently, the air quality standards are not high enough like they can be. Of course, the Ambient Air Quality Directive, if adopted as in current proposal, should increase this ambition. But of course, as we know, even these higher standards will not be aligned with the WHO guidelines. So there is room for even more ambition over time. Planning, enforcement, and monitoring is not currently not as effective. Plans that we have, air quality plans, can actually be turned into a tool to prevent air pollution, and they need to be adopted in a timely manner and really be effective to help us avoid these breaches on the national level of breaching the air quality standards. But enforcement and monitoring, of course, we have many breaches already across the EU, and there have been a number of judicial procedures taken by the Commission. But thus far, no member state was fined for the breach of the Ambient Air Quality Directive, nor the NEC directive itself. So something is not working well, and monitoring, of course, being improved. So building on what Veronica said. And then also what is interesting is that we are investing a lot, and we talk a lot about healthcare, but there is a gap between the two agendas still. We talk about health, it's also very localized, individualized, talk about symptoms, syndromes, but they don't really link them with the air quality, the environmental impacts, including air and pollution. So that's also a challenge at this point. And lack of citizen involvement and local action, not sufficient. We have good cases, and the paper lists some good practices and effort being made to reduce air pollution, including air quality, in Warsaw, in Gothenburg, in Krakow, in Sofia, in Brussels, but arguably more can be done to scale up these good practices across the continent. Now, when we talk about sectorial challenges with agriculture, definitely more can be done. The emissions remain very high, especially I will underline the emissions of ammonia, especially from the livestock sector. And the current agenda, common agricultural policy, does make references to air pollution, but it's not on the top of the list, let's say, and definitely more to be done. And also, as mentioned in the paper, when it comes to the energy, we all know the story about coal, right? But there are new issues, especially surrounding biomass, the use of biomass in the context of the current energy crisis and the Russian invasion. And this is problematic because burning of biomass can actually lead to significant emissions and can also lead to health impacts and pollution. And, we can argue that it's like a renewable source, but basically doesn't mean that's necessarily a good solution in the long run. So more to be done when it comes to coal and to try to prevent these negative effects of new fuels. When it comes to industry, I would say actually that a lot has been done. I mean, especially to cut the emissions of sulfur oxides, but there is room to do more, of course. And now the Industrial Emissions Directive being revised, and there are possibilities to introduce more innovative solutions, the best available techniques are top in the class. We use emergent technologies, so more room and of course to link it with other, say, industrial sectors such as agricultural production, which can also be an industrial effort in a way, and the Industrial Emissions Directive also. Hopefully that will be part of this new revised legislation. As to the mobility, we also have a number of things there that more can be done on a number of different fronts. But here I would highlight that there are efforts to decarbonize the mobility sector, but these efforts risk actually neglecting the pollution. It's not the same. So, for example, if you talk about synthetic fuels, they may help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but the pollution levels may stay the same or even increase. So this is just, I'm highlighting this. There are other things about low emission zones and no emission zones and so zero emission zones and so forth. A number of things can be done in the mobility sector, but we just to remind that this is not so simple. We can't just focus on one sector, one agenda and forget about the others. We need to look at the entire picture. Now, when it comes to the policy recommendations in the paper, in the final chapter, you will see a whole forest of recommendations of different sorts. We try to make it as clear and intelligible as possible, but I think there is something for everyone. And I invite you to check it out, and I think you will find some answers to any of the questions you want, or some suggestions for the way forward, confirming or adding on top of what is already being done at the EU level. But here, again, looking at the bigger picture, we need really to have this comprehensive approach to develop a comprehensive clean air agenda, which would eventually be aligned with the WHO guidelines, which in our view, this should happen before mid-21st century. We need to make this clean air an integral part of this overall vision for greater well-being. That should also be integrated in our economy and society, all our considerations. And here again, I will highlight the links between clean air and healthcare and social policies. We also need to improve our enforcement and monitoring, as mentioned. We need to consider not just the air quality directive here. These things actually can be quite fundamental, because if you look at our founding treaties, we see that if a member state is in breach of certain, let's say, legislation, EU legislation, it's not fined immediately if found culpable, but actually needs to be brought before the Court of Justice, the ECJ, again for the second time. And this can be a very tedious process to prove this, and back and forth. As I said, there'll be a number of 10 member states have been already found culpable, but none have been fined still. So, and meanwhile, we continue to breathe polluted air. So it's a bigger question that we need to ask. It's easier said than done to answer this question, but we need to keep asking and to see how we can really address this matter at its core. And we need to raise awareness, of course. We all know that who follow this topic, we know how much lives we lose, the health impacts, also the costs, economic costs and impacts, but somehow this information gets lost, or it's not actionable in the EU, but also in member states at the regional, local level. It's somehow sidelined. And we need to encourage our citizens, our communities to take an active involvement, starting from monitoring, but also other action. And as mentioned, all sectors need to be aligned. All this specific sectorial legislation needs to be aligned with the clean air agenda, with the horizontal legislation, if we are to succeed in this transition. So yeah, basically that's these are the main findings, and happy to discuss together with the team these findings, and also any other reflections now in the upcoming discussion also with the speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for giving us an insight into our discussion paper and for underlining again the need for a comprehensive approach, and that there is so much more room for ambition in different sectors, and also for enforced implementation. Now I'm very happy to turn to Niall, who is joining us remotely, and give you the floor to present us the ambitious Irish example of working on clean air. The floor is yours, Niall.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me today to reflect on the publications, the paper, and indeed to reflect on Ireland's ambition in this space. Certainly many of the key issues raised echo our own approach to air quality policy, and there are also many things for us to consider as we implement our new clean air strategy, which I'll reference a little later. I might just reflect upon our response to the EU Ambient Air Quality Directive proposal, and then reflect further on what has been a significant period of air policy developments here in Ireland. And in that context, and at the outset, I would like to confirm that Ireland, we welcome and support the level of ambition in the EU proposal to address air pollution. And we consider that the proposed limit values are suitable to ensure the appropriate coordinated approach to address air pollution across all member states. And the Commission's proposal, I think it represents a good balance between standards that will deliver better health outcomes through cleaner air for all EU citizens, but also is realistic and achievable. However, recognise that there is no state level of air pollution full alignment with the 2021 WHO air quality guidelines by 2040. I think should remain the longer term goal. We've already reflected this level of ambition in our own national clean air strategy, going even further by setting interim targets for 2026 and full alignment by 2040. And I don't doubt that reaching these targets will be challenging. And as such, it's really essential that the supporting measures are in place to ensure that they are achieved. In particular, I think it's essential that negotiations in the other EU files which influence air pollution, such as the IED or Euro 7, maintain a high level of ambition to ensure that all member states have all the required levers available to them to ensure continuous long-term improvements in air quality in the key activities and sectors. And it's really important that barriers to the introduction of required measures are not erected by a lack of coherence or ambition of other union-level legislation. I mean, Stefan has already mentioned there are a number of EU member states in difficulty in terms of the NEC. I mean, we're one of those because we recall in Ireland in particular the effect that the removal of milk quotas has had on the level of our ammonia emissions, which continues to cause us significant challenges. Again, engagement by civil society has a really important role in driving effective environmental standards, you know, providing really valuable oversight of legislation by those whom it's devised to protect. And it's essential that the public are given the tools to hold government and other actors to account where they're negligent and failing in their duties to implement measures to improve air quality. I've been asked today to speak about the Irish example of being ambitious with air quality, and I'm not necessarily comfortable with held out as an example to other member states, particularly given Stefan's comments and our own difficulties with ammonia. But I do think it is fair to say that the ambition we have been able to demonstrate over the past 12 to 18 months, it does highlight the priority that the Irish government has afforded to cleaning the air that we breathe in order to protect the health and well-being of the people that we ultimately serve. Our experience also serves to illustrate that this is a task that it can't be undertaken in isolation, but it requires the broadest possible coalition of state actors and public participation. And certainly many lessons have been learned over the past 12 to 18 months, which will ultimately, I hope, be remembered in Ireland as the year that the health benefits of low smoke zones enjoyed by citizens in our cities and larger towns for 30 years were finally brought to every part of our country. And a pathway was further developed through the introduction of our first national clean air strategy to improve the quality of our air here in Ireland. And air pollution in Ireland, it causes somewhere between 13 and 1400 deaths every year, which would be up to 10 times the number of people who die on our roads. And as you all know, and as has been referenced already, it's linked to a range of illnesses: stroke, heart disease, lung disease, chronic and acute respiratory diseases, including asthma and indeed dementia. And in Ireland, our deaths from air pollution have been primarily associated with solid fuel burning, and attempts to move to a national bituminous coal ban in Ireland, it didn't succeed under previous administrations because of vested interests, because of legal threats that coal companies issued about the unequal treatment of coal compared to other solid fuels, particularly sod, peat, and wood. So notwithstanding the evidence that extending the smoky coal ban nationwide by providing regulatory controls for other fuels would result in significant improvements to the quality of Irish air with the corresponding benefits for the health of our people. Previous governments were not in a position to make the really tough political decisions required to introduce such measures. And it is difficult to put health considerations in a political sphere, but that's the reality in which we all work. But in back to September 2020, we extended regulations to include areas with a population of over 10,000. And since that point, we worked to develop a robust regulatory framework that would result in the removal of bituminous or smoky coal from the Irish market. And this work was undertaken in certainly the full knowledge that to fulfill this commitment, measures were needed to address emissions from other solid fuels, and in the absence of such measures, it would not be legally possible for us to proceed with what would become an effective national ban. And just reflecting the Irish circumstances, much of the debate here, both political and public, focused solely on the use of peat or turf, and our traditional and cultural attachment to the bog here in Ireland as a source of cheap energy. And be honest, this was precisely the calculation made by those vested interests I referenced earlier, who had for so long resisted attempts to control the quality of solid fuels made available on the Irish market, that once turf entered the equation, the political fallout would be too toxic to continents progressing our commitments to the Irish people. But in fairness, this was never an option. Ever expanding research continued to demonstrate the links between air quality and even wider impacts on human health, and reducing premature deaths, the other negative health impacts I referenced, as well as improving quality of life for all, especially those with conditions that are exacerbated by poor air quality. Was the main aim of our air quality policy, and indeed of the regulations that were ultimately agreed and introduced. And what we tried to do is we tried to build on the momentum at that point, that this debate around solid fuels and air quality and the health impacts. We tried to really build on this momentum, and we succeeded in publishing Ireland's first national clean air strategy in April of this year. What it does, it provides an overarching policy framework within which clean air policies can be formulated and given effect in a manner consistent with national, EU and international policy considerations and priorities. And the strategy, it recognises and builds upon a range of national plans and policies which already contain actions that will have an impact on our air quality, and in particular, obviously, Ireland's action plan, because of very many synergies between air and climate measures, which include electrification of the road transport fleet, taking further action in relation to ammonia, improving the energy efficiency of our homes, and ultimately reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And the strategy sets out that synergies between these plans can be maximised with a view to achieving lasting reductions in the health and environmental impacts of air pollution in what we think is the most effective way. In terms of the 2021 WHO Air Quality Guidelines, the strategy does commit us to achieving the interim IT3 target by 2026, the IT4 target by 2030, and then the achievement of the final IT4 values by 2040. And there's no doubt that this will be a major challenge. But we're confident that the new governance structure and legislative approach described in the strategy will ensure that the responsibility for the actions and measures required across government to meet these targets is assigned to the relevant stakeholders, they're implemented in a timely manner, and that there is real accountability within the system. The provision of data from our Environmental Protection Agency and our enhanced National Ambient Air Quality Monitoring Programme, it gives us the comprehensive evidence base to tackle the sources of air pollution, which we know need to be addressed here in Ireland. Continued improvements to our monitoring and modelling will certainly assist further in this regard. Just reflecting on the paper that's just been published this morning, there are issues that we are also trying to address in our national policy formation, such as the links between climate, transport and energy, problems around public awareness and how we can support behavioural change, supporting and empowering local action, increasing monitoring, really promoting citizen science in this space. So it's reassuring that our strategies also recognise these challenges and have set out pathways to address them as we implement the strategy and work towards a clean air future for all of our citizens. So just in that context, and to reflect, I imagine to reflect backwards, the deadly smog that settled over London in December '52 and caused some 12,000 deaths that winter really forced the world to face the dangers of air pollution, and has really inspired an ongoing movement. The past weeks, the wildfires and associated air pollution we've witnessed throughout North America has shown us again that the interrelated threats to our climate and our air must and can be addressed locally, regionally and globally. In Ireland, I think that we're in a position to continue to take the bold, immediate and integrated actions required to address these really existential threats to our planet and our people. And I certainly look forward to working with you all here in doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niall, for pointing out the difficulties you face in Ireland, especially with ammonia and fuel burning and coal, but also how you try to tackle all of this in a comprehensive approach, where you try to tackle the sources of air pollution and set action on transport and energy, but also think of the behavioral change and of including citizens, and mention the role that citizen science can play in this. And now I'll give you the floor, Gillian, very happy to do so, and hear your reflections on how to achieve cleaner air for all. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Melanie. As Melanie said, I'm the program director at the Clean Air Fund, which is a philanthropic organisation set up in 2019, really to provide funding and support to a wide range of governments, city authorities, NGOs, research institutions to drive this global demand for cleaner air. I'm delighted to join my colleagues from the Clean Air Fund here today, Agatha, whom many of you will know, and Michael, who's just joined us in Brussels as our representative. And I suppose I'd just like to start by congratulating the EPC for this great report and also for hosting the event here today. I mean, it's very timely given that, given the work that's going on renegotiating the European Ambient Air Quality Directive, as which Veronica has elaborated in detail. And which we hope will set Europe on a course to alignment with the WHO guidelines for clean air. As Niall said, it's going to take some time to reach those very, very ambitious standards, but this represents a really good step forward, the new directives. And although the discussion today is, of course, focused on the EU, I think we all need to be very mindful that the rest of the world is looking at the EU. And it will hopefully, if this new directive is adopted, will serve as inspiration for other regional bodies and countries, and therefore be really pivotal to drive ambitious global action on air pollution. And in addition to the conference that Veronica mentioned that will take place in Rotterdam next year, we're also hoping that there will be a global air quality conference, the second of its kind, taking place in Accra in November. So there'll be not only regional action again, but this will set the stage, we hope, for ambitious global action. And we know that 90% of the world's population breathes air that's harmful to their health. 98% of the world's population. I mean, it's just a staggering figure. And another really shocking statistic from the WHO is that they estimate 7 million people annually die prematurely from dirty air. And this is more than the combined mortality associated with HIV, malaria, and TB combined. And if you reflect back on the global effort and funding and energy that went into tackling particularly HIV and more recently malaria, we are, I suppose, often at the Clean Air Fund simply astounded that the world is not up in arms, the fact that their governments are still permitting them to breathe in air that is harmful to their health. So I think we all need to really hold on to that. I mean, I think we all would like to applaud the European Commission for its continued efforts to tackle air pollution, not only through this current process of renegotiating the Air Quality Directive, but also for the adoption of this wider Zero Pollution Action Plan in 2021. And as the EPC report elaborates, this action plan sets a target to reduce premature deaths in Europe due to exposure to fine particulate matter by 55% by 2030 over the 2005 levels. Ambitious itself, but it is achievable, as Niall has elaborated, and it's also very, very affordable. But I think to get there, the focus is not only to actually set these ambitious targets, but it's also to focus really hard on implementation. We see globally that many countries, Africa, India, China, many countries where the Clean Air Fund is active, have set very ambitious targets. They've adopted legislation, they've adopted policies, but implementation and enforcement is lacking. So innovation, particularly in these polluting sectors, that again, they've been well elaborated in the report in agriculture, in industry, in mobility, in urban planning, domestic heating, there's got to be solutions and enforcement in all of these sectors. And to do that, I think we really are going to rely on strong partnerships between government, city authorities, and business and civil society and research institutions. And that really was one of the key premises of why the Clean Air Fund was set up in 2019. It was to support these kind of multi-sectoral partnerships. So, for example, in London, the Clean Air Fund not only worked with the Mayor's Office to fund a lot of the modelling, just to actually demonstrate the costs and the impact of different policy measures, but it also has worked with a number of civil society partners, most notably Asthma and Lung UK, to highlight the health benefits of clean air to the people of London, to actually generate some support. It's also worked a lot with media houses, with journalists, with young people, again, to get stories out as to the health benefits of cleaner air. Following the introduction of the ultra-low emission zone in London, harmful pollutants have been reduced by 26%, and that's over just 4 years. And now, thanks to its expansion in inner London, over 4 million people, we estimate, are breathing much cleaner air. And that's including children who we know are much more susceptible to air pollution in thousands and thousands of cities across the city. We're similarly supporting municipal authorities in Warsaw, in Krakow, and in Sofia to replicate some of the promising approaches piloted in London. And we know already there's 325 low emission zones in cities and urban centres across Europe, and there's more than 500 more planned, plus 35 zero emission zones, and they are set to be in place by 2030. So as Veronica said, there is a lot to congratulate ourselves on. There is progress, particularly in cities, but there's so much more to do. We're working with businesses in partnership with the World Economic Forum. We've currently got 16 quite large businesses collaborating in the World Economic Forum's Clean Air Alliance. These include businesses such as Maersk, Amazon, IKEA, Siemens, and they are coming together to collaborate on ways of better measuring their air pollution footprint and sharing promising approaches to reduce air pollution, particularly in the work through their value chain. And with the mandatory air pollution reporting on the horizon here in the EU, under the new corporate sustainability reporting directives, such partnerships with business are going to be key, I think, to moving forward. We're also working closely with research institutes and think tanks, including the EPC. I don't know if you classify yourself as a think tank, but in relation to this report, certainly you've managed to synthesize a lot of really interesting statistics and put out some great recommendations for policy action. We're working across Europe to try and understand better the long-term costs and benefits of tackling air pollution, and particularly to look at ways to ensure that very vulnerable households do not bear the brunt of the transition, to ensure that low-income households can be supported and that the clean air transition is just and inclusive. We're working with global UN bodies. We've got a big partnership with the World Health Organization and with the UN Environment Programme to drive their ambition and action in setting global standards. And we've also signed quite an interesting partnership with the World Athletics Federation to bring athletes to the fore to speak about their need for clean air, for example, when they're running marathons in cities. And finally, lastly, but not least, we are working with a vast array of NGO partners across the whole of Europe pushing for clean air. I mean, we're particularly proud of the partnership we have with the Polish Smog Alert, which Agata can talk at great length about. They ran a great national campaign 2 years ago, putting up huge artificial lungs, 2 meters by 3 meters, which were lined with white material. And over 2 weeks, you saw that material go black, which was a very potent demonstration of the kind of air that citizens in Poland were breathing in. And we're taking those lungs with us all across the world, really, because, as I say, they're a really strong, visceral demonstration of the air that we breathe. Polish Smog Alert, and now they've generated a huge calculator so that citizens can actually calculate their own annual costs and benefits of moving, for example, from solid fuel burners to heat pumps. Again, citizen science or citizen engagement, we feel, is so critical to generate the kind of public support that we need for sharper action by public authorities in clean air. So just to conclude, I'd again like to congratulate and applaud the EPC and the European Commission for driving greater action on global air. Remember all that the world is watching us in Europe, and that we'll be following negotiations around these directives really closely. And I just end by saying we're delighted also to support many of the Brussels-based partners represented here today. Penta, I see in the audience, HEAL on screen, the EPC, and also the EEB. And we're delighted to work with all of you to realise our vision of clean air for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Thank you for widening the perspective to the global level, and for highlighting again how implementation is important. Especially also when we are talking about air pollution and linkages to climate change. Of course, we cannot forget that air pollution itself has no borders, and climate change also is a global challenge. And thank you also for your insight in the partnerships that you have with all of these different kinds of stakeholders, and the common effort for cleaner air. Now we're turning again to our remote participants, and I'm happy to give the floor to Anne from HEAL to give us her remarks on what the EU needs to do to turn the goals for clean air into action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I hope you can hear me well. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation, and sorry that I can't join you in person. I'm actually joining you from Budapest, from the 7th WHO Ministerial Conference on Health and Environment, where 46 of the 53 WHO European region health and environment ministers and ministries are gathered, and pollution and tackling pollution is very much on policymakers and stakeholders' minds gathered here in Budapest. As actually right now, as we're speaking, there's a plenary session on tackling pollution. And what I very much hear is this broad agreement that the health impacts from air pollution are unacceptably high, and that we need to see greater policy action on reducing ill health and on preventing disease. And that's a very important message emanating here. We are talking today here about the EU, so going back to the European Union, and very much also about the leadership that the EU has and needs to take when it comes to achieving clean air. And so what I'm going to talk about this morning is very much focused on the revision of the EU's Ambient Air Quality Directive as a unique opportunity to swiftly and significantly reduce ill health and better protect people. Because we all know in this room, and we've heard it many times, but I think it's important to continue to stress it, that clean air is a question of political will. It's not a question of a lifestyle. It's not a question of individual choices. We need to have the right policy frameworks in place to protect all of us, and especially those most at risk who cannot protect themselves. So 3 points I wanted to bring in. And the first one is on the urgency to act. This already came through this morning, with all the numbers and the evidence that was shared on how air pollution harms our health and harms the environment. And I wanted to bring in and highlight here new evidence that we're seeing now from an EU-funded research project that shows that air pollution actually makes worse the health impacts that we're seeing from heat. So there's very much a linkage between climate change and between air pollution. When temperatures are high and air pollution is poor, we have seen and we will see more people die from respiratory and cardiovascular disease. You've all seen the news this week that Monday and Tuesday were actually the hottest days of the world on record. We all know the projection. We know the projection from the Lancet Countdown that the European region is the most vulnerable when it comes to, or most at risk when it comes to the health-related impacts from heat. So I think we're very much moving into dire times, and this underlines why we urgently need to act now. And actually, that achieving clean air and having strict clean air standards is also a way of adapting to what we're seeing, to climate change. Not to speak of the the mitigation boost it can give by addressing fossil fuel burning. So that's my first point. Second point, aiming high. Why do we need to aim high? Again, with many in the room, this is clear. It's important to highlight again the moment we're in when it comes to this EU revision. We're a year ahead now of the EU elections, the elections to the next European Parliament, but also the elections to set the EU priorities. And people all across Europe are very much looking to their policymakers and are questioning and wanting answers to how does the EU benefit myself and my life and the health of communities. What is the EU doing? And I think with the revision of the Ambient Air Quality Directive, we have a very clear case that this is a law that will be beneficial for everyone's health, but especially beneficial for those who are most at risk, including children, including pregnant women, including the elderly, including those already ill and those faced with health inequalities. And to put it very simply, with this revision, I think we owe it to the people to better protect them, and we owe it especially to those who can't protect themselves. So what does it mean now in aiming high? This very much means for us as HEAL and for the health sector that we have seen very, very engaged in this. This means full alignment, not only taking a small step, but full alignment with what the World Health Organization recommends and what the science actually tells us by 2030. As part of an ambitious and health protective package, because it's the full alignment is a key step, but this directive is more than that. It needs to have a comprehensive package in order to make the standards work and achieve the health improvements we need to see. And my third point, and again this was highlighted before, is that clean air makes economic sense. We have all the evidence. Ms. Manfredi mentioned it at the beginning. The cost-benefit ratio of this law and of this update is very, very clear. And I wanted to bring in an analysis from one of HEAL's member, a health insurer from Belgium, the Independent Health Insurance Funds, who is one of the health insurers, but there are actually others who are now getting more engaged into the topic of clean air and specifically in the revision, because the health insurers see very much the costs that are accruing in their societies, and the costs and the prevention opportunity that are there with the revision of the Ambient Air Quality Directive, but also with other environmental and climate legislation. So what did the independent health insurance funds do? They looked at the data they have available from people who had to go to see their doctor, both for adults and for children. So they actually analyzed data from 1 million people in Belgium and found that if air quality in Belgium for PM2.5, the annual average, was fully aligned, fully in line with what the World Health Organization recommends, 272,310, so almost 300,000 doctor's visits for adults and around 63,000 doctor's visits for children could be avoided. And you can translate this into economic benefits. And this is that, just from this population they have of 1 million, this would translate into 9.4 million euros saved health costs. And if you took this up to the whole population of Belgium, we're talking about saving 47 million euros in health costs through clean air, through avoided doctor's visits. And now this is not to speak of all the many, many people who are actually waiting for months to see their doctor and to see specialists, and that we could also, significantly speed up the treatment of people we're seeing. So with everything that we're seeing, it's important to also highlight that the cost of inaction, of not really aiming high, of not urgently acting, are much, much greater than the costs and the benefits of action that we're seeing. And I leave it there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. for pointing out also the newest evidence on the linkages between climate change and air pollution, and how air pollution especially worsens the effects of heat, especially in cities, of course, but everywhere, and of reminding us of the urgency to act also in relation to the EU elections, of course, that are upcoming, which puts pressure not only on the legislative process, also for the Ambient Air Quality Directive and the potential to raise the ambitions there. And thank you to all the panelists for their introductory remarks. Now we would also like to hear from our respondents, and I turn to Robert, who is joining us online as well. And I give you the floor for your statement. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank EPC event organizers, and especially today's panelists, for their role in communicating the increasingly well-known societal impacts of air pollution on public health and the environment. As a leading environmental services provider, Suez is fully supportive of this morning's discussion, and certainly the efforts to have an increasingly ambitious EU air quality directive. I would like to emphasize on a few of the messages I heard during this morning's discussion, particularly on the need for increased air quality surveillance. Again, highlighting the need to better monitor and understand at the hyperlocal or the street level scale the impacts of air pollution on our communities, and the need to consider recent innovations, be it on monitoring instrumentation or air quality modeling, combining traditional deterministic approaches, but also with newer statistical modeling approaches incorporating artificial intelligence advances. And finally, I'd also like to emphasize the need to translate this increased surveillance into action, as we just heard Anne mention, on the treatment side, both at source and in ambient applications where we need to protect perhaps the most vulnerable among our citizens. And then finally, I'd like to close out, again, emphasizing the message I heard this morning, highlighting a need for innovation also in financial models and how we can better support EU communities to move ahead with their ambition and impactful air quality strategy and plans. So again, thanks to everyone for these great discussions, and look forward to contributing and collaborating in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for highlighting the points from the discussion. And over to you, Lina, for your remarks.
Thank you. Okay, it works. Thank you so much for inviting me here. My name is Lina Forsman, and I work as a policy officer for Gothenburg European Office. And we welcome the Commission proposal, as we already discussed earlier last year. But at the same time, we believe that it should be further aligned with the WHO recommendations. We see the argument that Gillian brought up, that we have the chance to be a global frontrunner, and we should also set the ambitions high, as Anne was saying. From a city development perspective, we think that there's a need for some short-term flexibility, but to meet the long-term, to align with the WHO recommendations for the long term. Regarding the fourth pillar that Veronica mentioned, and also policy recommendation 4 by the EPC, access to information, we really welcome this part of the proposal. It's something that we've been working in Gothenburg for quite some time, both through citizen engagement projects, similar to those that Niall mentioned, but also through our websites where you can follow the air quality of the city. Still, we also at local level see that more needs to be done by us. There's also a question of governance and how we best achieve this. Regarding local action and the missions, in the EPC report, it was mentioned that there's still some underutilized synergies between actions that target climate change, biodiversity, and air quality. So that's something that we see could be further explored, and also in line with the new information on how heat actually exacerbates air pollution. We think maybe that could be an area for like exploring within the mission for climate adaptation and also the mission for climate neutral and smart cities. Gillian also mentioned collaborations across the value chain, which is something we work with also in public procurement. But here we see that we're still a bit limited by costs, where that still weighs pretty highly, even though we are a front runner in public procurement. We still see that, unfortunately, it's not always that cost still somehow wins often. And yeah, I thank you. I welcome future discussions on this.
Thank you very much, Lina. And now I would like to open the floor also to the audience. In the room, please raise your hand if you have any questions. I already see questions online, but please don't be shy also in the room. If no one wants to go, yes, please. Sorry, in the back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Tobias Kreis with the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. And now agriculture was mentioned, and it's also, well, the cow there is the first picture in the report, in the executive summary. And just to share with you that we and our cooperative members are, of course, very supportive of this agenda, and we are working as we speak. We hope next week in Strasbourg we'll secure the inclusion of livestock, of the dairy, of the cow sector in the emissions in the IED directive. So a lot is being done, and we look to the cities. Of course, there is action. You mentioned this. A lot has been done. Now, my question to, I guess, the panel, the think tanks, also the philanthropic civil society, would be, now when we have to address a cost benefit analysis that says 1 to 7. I mean, that's impressive. And if and when that number is that strong, one would hope that that would also impress finance ministers. Now, the question is whether that is the case, because it would seem that there might be an issue here of a tragedy of the commons, so that a lot of these benefits would fall in the national health services across the member states, which is, of course, not EU money. On the other hand, the costs, so the 1 to 7, that would fall when it comes, in our case, well, in the agriculture case, we talk about an area which is union competence to an extent that is not similar to any other sector. And here, the Common Agricultural Policy, which in this town is often referred to as the pay-for-all policy instrument of the European Union, represents less than 1% of EU public expenditure in the member states and in the EU. So now the question is whether, or let's say a sector which represents, here there are four images: there's transport, there's industry, energy, and agriculture, whether a budget that is less than 1% of public expenditure in the EU and also has to address a plenitude of other issues, including climate action and biodiversity and nature restoration and rural development and social coherence, you name it. If there is not a funding gap, and if discussions on the next MFF, might be a place to start, is the Commission anticipating linking proposals here with requests from member states to pay more? Or are think tanks and others anticipating new market measures, new sources of funding to pay for this? Because in the absence of money to pay for this, our fear is that we will have, let's say, a societal confrontation between producers and all these groups that will benefit, which is a sad situation.
Thank you very much for your question, and I'll take the next question.
William Garcia with the CEFIC, the chemical industry. Have you one or two questions and a couple of comments as well, and many thanks actually for inviting us to this event today. I think Ms. Manfredi, on your pillar number 2, 3, and 4, inclusive of enforcement and measurement, I would second Mr. Kelly's remarks there, that we can only manage what we measure, and measuring the pollution in cities at a hyperscale, as mentioned, at the street level, has become a leveraging success factor, which I doubt we have in many cities. Cruising the streets of Brussels, I couldn't see any, actually. And just for the anecdote, the city of Brussels, and this is about city planning here, has announced the closing of many tunnels across July and August, which actually would make the traffic in Brussels even worse during those hot days in Brussels. So measurements, enforcement, second point, and that is the pillar number 2 of the proposal. Of course, we need to seek for higher and be ambitious with that regards. We all concur to that. But nevertheless, the current levels are not even enforced. And quite a few member states are not compliant with that, not even reporting eventually on some important pollutants, you name them. Don't you think there is even a stronger need for enforcing the current standards whilst seeking for higher ambitions in due course? So enforcement, second point. Then a little bit of political here on the timing of the revision of the Commission proposal within the institutions, the co-legislators. It was said many times we need a very strong political support there. That's to come from the top. Whereas I see that the Parliament has postponed the vote in plenary to September, yet to be determined when exactly, from the proposed June July plenary actually. Whereas the Council has not even issued a general approach. The Swedish presidency has decided to speed that over to the Spain presidency that has it in December. Whether it would materialize or would go to the Belgian presidency on first half is still unsaid. But if it did overspear to the Belgian presidency, it would actually fall right in the middle of the elections. The Parliament would, and I'm thinking of the trial there, the Parliament would be demoted, actually. And the parliamentarians would, rightly so, actually, run for elections. So my point is about timing there. Timing is of essence. Is it the right timing, actually, to push that very important directive that has short, medium, and longer term effects in a time when the political momentum is maybe not that high compared to other points being discussed at the Parliament and the Council?
Thank you for your questions. And I would first turn to you, Veronica, as the questions are on funding and also the legislative process and timing of the proposal, but also highlighting, of course, the need for monitoring and the suggestion to rather enforce the current standards. So please, but I also invite the other panelists to react, of course, afterwards.
Thank you so much. So many thanks for these very valid questions from the outset. So first of all, to the colleague from the Danish, did I get it correctly, Agriculture and Food Council? So nice to meet you. I really don't think that the lack of funding is the primary problem. So I hear you, and yes, I can tell you that certainly you can count on the European Commission. I don't know what the co-legislators will do, because the discussions about how to revise the MFF have already kicked off inside the House to continue supporting what we call the green and digital transformation. So anything that needs to be done in order to continue supporting the transformation also of the agricultural sector will stay very high on our agenda. You know that the CAP represents an enormous chunk of our current funding program. But what I see more in general is that also for the agricultural sector, we should indeed try to be super holistic, and instead of saying, you know, complying with these ammonia requirements, if we manage to get them properly uptaken in the Industrial Emission Directive, where we've seen a lot of weakening attempts coming, particularly by the agricultural constituency, unfortunately. It's not just, you know, cost a lot, which is not true, is going to, you know, hamper our possibilities. Look at the broad picture. If you get the air pollution challenge right, you get your biodiversity better, because biodiversity is dramatically impacted by bad air. And, you know, when I was a little young girl, tell you an anecdote. My grandfather used to be himself very active in agriculture, was always pointing to me the little white butterflies, telling me, you know, if they fly around, it means the air here is very good. And something that shocked me so much when I came to Brussels, but not to mention Rome, this is the city where I worked, for years, I've not seen butterflies flying around. And as something that has really touched me during the COVID-19 pandemic is that all of a sudden I was seeing some butterflies flying over my garden again. So butterflies, as you know, is just one example of pollinators as such. And without them, you don't get the fruits. I'm getting some nice apples now in my garden. I'm very happy about that. So what are we talking about? You are there to produce the food. If the air is not clean, you will not be able to produce the food. We will all be very unhappy about that. And I think this is part of a much bigger story, as we know, of putting things in balance. I always say zero pollution is not just the absolute mathematical, oh my God, we kill ourselves with cost agenda. It's an agenda that enables the planet to naturally continue helping us. I mean, if it has managed to bear with mankind, which has always been very active in economic terms for so many millennia, it means it has a lot of potentiality, but you have to respect the limits. So that's my key message. And to the colleague from CEFIC, well, first of all, thank you for your very open considerations about the timing. I don't hide that. Of course, we also see these elements of worries and preoccupation. The piece of news that the vote of the plenary has just been postponed is very fresh. It has reached us yesterday. We are aware. I continue to believe, based on the atmospherics that we capture both in the Council working parties and in the talks with the parliamentarians, that although the topic is clearly identified as one that is politically very sensitive and important, the amount of goodwill to get it done seems so far, I repeat, at this stage, to prevail over the risk that, it should be kind of, pushed back away. Maybe also because I think that the people working on the file fully understand the impact it has on industrial production at large, let's say economic activities as large. And since the file is so clear about fixing a trajectory and doing so with a dynamic review mechanism, I think we owe it to our economic operators to be clear that, yes, this is where the European Union wants to go. And I still sense a goodwill around that. Now, it's more on the modalities of at which level of ambition, for 2030, for 2035, do we align, don't we align right now? But I continue to stay moderately optimistic that we will manage. And I very much count both on the Spanish and the Belgian presidency, may I add, independently from the political colors of the parties that will be in government, because I hope that the Clean Air agenda identifies an agenda that is really serving the interest of citizens, whatever is your party of belonging. So I would stop here also to leave some more time.
Thank you very much. And I see that Anne has raised her hand and also wants to come in, please.
Thank you. Indeed, I wanted to respond to two questions, and thank you very much for those. First of all, on agriculture, I wanted to highlight that, as we all know, agriculture is one of the key sectors contributing to air pollution, but it's not the only sector. There are several sectors, and it's actually tackling pollution and reducing pollution in all the sectors is key, and is also why the clean air standards are so important, to actually set the framework for then the necessary action in the many, not the many, but in the key sectors: agriculture, transport, household emission, industry. Having said that, I think there is definitely a need to consider especially efforts in agriculture and to transform agriculture, not only when it comes to reducing pollution, but the current industrial agriculture that we have in the EU is not only unsustainable, it's also unhealthy in more ways than contributing to air pollution. It's also unhealthy when it comes to the use of pesticides and fertilizers and all the many problems associated with too high meat and dairy consumption. So there's a whole conversation to be had, and I think on that many people are not yet aware of the significant contribution that agriculture makes. And there was just a new study on that, in cities, actually the pollution from agriculture coming in from outside is also a key factor that needs to be tackled. And also on the timing, yes, I do not share this view from CEFIC that there seems to be a delay. And actually I want to, strongly say that I don't see this, and this is not something that we see happening both within the Parliament. We very much see a commitment. You saw the results of the ENVI vote, and across the political parties, we do see a commitment in tackling the health impacts of air pollution and advancing this key law for the protection, as I see very much among council. As I said, I'm here in Budapest with the health and the environment ministers, and there is also a very clear message on the urgency and a commitment to tackle air pollution. So I think that makes me confident that we, the time is, it will go through, and it's also very much needed. For our health, there must not be any delays in this key law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne and Gillian.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I suppose I'd like to make a general point. It's not really EU or Europe specific, but when one thinks about the cost benefit analysis, I think I suppose we shouldn't be surprised, but just how vocal those industries bearing the costs are compared to the beneficiaries. I mean, I reflect a little bit on the ULEZ expansion, and that's being challenged in the courts at the moment. And we've got the car lobby there talking about if the ULEZ, if the ultra low emission zone in London is expanded, that will be a tax on drivers or a tax on liberties. That's the kind of language that's used. And yet it's only actually going to affect 1 in 5 cars coming into London. It's only the diesel cars. And there isn't the same orchestrated angry lobby about the health benefits that will accrue to those, particularly children who are particularly affected by air pollution, and the benefits to the healthcare sector. So somehow I think the NGO and civil society sector has got to become as organized and as vocal in pushing back on this narrative. If there's a 7-to-1 ratio cost benefit analysis, again, I'm surprised we are not screaming for tougher action. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Stefan, you also want to come in?
Yes, just to say, indeed, I think it's in a way, it is a paradox that we have 7-to-1 cost benefits ratio, but then there are still lots of resistance and concerns. And in a way, we can discuss that, of course, how the cost will be distributed would necessarily be even, and it depends on the sector, it depends on the particular case. But on a macro level, it's 7-to-1. That's what science, what data effects are showing. And it can, when you look at the analysis, that can even be more than 7-to-1. This is actually the lower ratio, 42 billion per year for 2030, and around more or less around that year. So it can go above. But it's about, I would agree, it's about the tragedy of the commons and the hidden costs, and that in a way, by addressing the topic of air pollution, we can actually, that can help us solve some other problems that we take for granted. And this is also what Lena and what Anne mentioned about the co-benefits between reducing air pollution and nature restoration and climate action. In my presentation, I was indicating to how, for example, decarbonization not the same as depollution, but it can also be taken together. I mean, we have the case of, as already discussed, that heat increases the negative effects of ozone, especially in cities. And we also have particles like black carbon or methane that contribute to both global warming, but also to air pollution. So if you address them together, you can help solve a number of problems in one single stroke. So that's and I mean, also just let's consider it ourselves. I mean, those at least who live in Belgium, in Brussels, we pay taxes here and social contributions for our health and social insurance. We are paying via social contribution, but also via taxes. Parts of our taxes go where ideally they should go for something else, right? They go for health and retirement and so forth. But this is all linked to air pollution also. So like, you know, it is in our own interest to help to actually really reduce, improve air quality. And in a way that we can't imagine, or we can't always link directly, we will feel it in one way or another. I mean, naturally health, but also in financial sense. And yeah, I mean, for agriculture, we also do have a common agricultural policy that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to have additional income. We can also see how we use the funding that we already have in a better way and link it to the green transition and zero pollution. One other instrument that is interesting, I would say, is sustainable finance and the taxonomy, which is currently being developed, the environmental taxonomy, when there is one pillar of this environmental taxonomy is concerning pollution. So that is something that can also help channelize private investments towards economic activities that pollute less. So that's something also to consider. But communicating and awareness raising is definitely key in this sense, because some things are very clear and we can discuss how to do it, technical things, but I think we should be already over this discussion, like whether we should do it, and this is more like how to do it and concern specific challenges in particular sectors, in my view.
Yes, Veronica, you want to add something, a brief intervention, and then I also saw that Robert wants to come in.
I just want also to say we are in a point in time where, for those who are following what happens in the Brussels bubble, there is a lot of noise, a lot of arguments brought by the largest industrial corporations about the fact that in this mandate, Brussels, the European Commission, would have dramatically increased the reporting requirements. May I say to this point that I really feel that it's the first time, and of course we all bear the cost of that. It's the first time we are building integrated metrics to measure the environmental footprint of everything. So it's true. There is a beginning of this adventure, a beginning of this journey of how you measure your air pollution, your water, your soil impact, your impact on biodiversity as such, and building this metric, making consistent, requires an effort. We all agree. It's like very much the first time that you have to set up a fiscal system for a member state, So it comes with a certain cost. But first of all, there is coherence between what the European Commission has been building. And secondly, it can only get better, and it can only make the life of our businesses so much clearer in all the job that they're doing in, improving their industrial production, being able to bring to the market food products and other products that come with this, I would say, at the same time, toxic-free, nature-positive, cleaner dimension, that I think there is also an increasing appetite to have from consumer side. So we are really recalibrating demand and supply. And I think we should collectively work together to make this as feasible and as least burdensome as possible, but still do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Veronica. And over to you, Robert.
Yes, I think our discussions illustrate that there's definitely growing consensus on the far-reaching benefits of improving air quality. I think the challenge that we're outlining is how do we translate those benefits into local investment and action, and hence our call for innovation on the financial modeling side, considering public-private partnerships and increased collaboration amongst the various stakeholders.
Thanks, Robert. Yes. 3 more hands.
Thank you very much. Yanis Vogmanis from Turquoise International. We are venture capital. About 2 years ago, we looked at a possible investment in a novel sensor for air quality monitoring. And on the production side, everything was okay, but the market was a very big difficulty, because it was clear that the procurement of such devices is going very slowly and almost not moving at all. We didn't invest. So when do you think, I understand that the discussion is around solving the problem rather than knowing when it's going to be solved. But when do you think that we could possibly return to this investment? Yeah. So when realistically could there be a market for such devices in Europe? And we don't need subsidies or anything like that. Just the market. When could that market be back on its feet for several 100,000 devices? Do you have a timing when you think the problems might be solved sufficiently that cities start procuring?
Stefan Anderson, I'm from Health Policy Watch. So I have 2 questions. They kind of work together. The first one is more specifically for Veronica. You mentioned at the beginning this idea of having sort of a competition style approach to compensation and enforcement. If you could just talk a little bit about what that looks like and expand on this idea that lungs should be protected the same as market dynamics, I think that would be very interesting. The second point I'd like to make is to sort of widen the scope of the air pollution discussion we're having. I think in these discussions, we're often talking about fine particulate matter. And, PM 2.5 is also the subject of the WHO guideline that gets referenced a lot. But billions in economic and health damage is also caused by hundreds of other kinds of toxins. PFAS is one example. There are literally hundreds of them. And economic data on the health impacts, and actually, just data on the health impacts tout court, is lacking even at the cutting edge of research, just because of how many chemicals there are. I know industry is very loud on this point as well, and actually the EU hasn't updated its rules on what pollutants need to be monitored since 2006. So I guess the question is, how does air pollution policy deal with these pollutants, and how difficult is enforcement going to be when we don't have data for these things, when it's already difficult enough to enforce something we have very clear data on? Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, thanks for taking my question. Which regards again, I had 2 other points instead of, besides the timing things that you picked up, and many thanks for clarification on that. But one of my points actually related to measurement, and which actually relates very well to the latest question on measurement and how to measure better to actually control. Reporting for in general terms for the industry is no brainer. And you know that very well. The industry is in general, not only the chemical industry is emissions are tracked under the IED, the Industrial Emission Directive, that was invented more than 12, 13 years ago, is undertaking a major recast as we speak, and the reporting is an integral part of that. So the industry sectors in general are the best equipped actually to measure and report. So the concern should go to where the measurement is actually lacking. Likely not across the industry. So we improve that every day, and we have to, but cities are ill-equipped. So measurements is, I think, one of the dominant factors. Again, we can only control on an integrated manner things that we measure.
Thank you. And maybe I will also bring in the questions from the online participants. So we had one question on the return on the investment and if there is a timing for that. And we had a question about the enforcement. And actually from the online participants, this is coming from the Polish Smog Alert is also asking about the enforcement of the new air quality directive based on the Polish experience. And related to that, the question on health impacts and how air policy will deal with the new pollutants, and the question of CEFIC about measurement. And on top of that, we also have the online question on the role of healthcare professionals, public health professionals and medical doctors. How can they be included, and can their role be strengthened in general in air quality monitoring and their influence in health care at primary level? Yes, please.
With the colleagues maybe complimenting me, so trying to go pretty fast but comprehensively. To the question of the colleague who has devised, and I'm very happy you have devised an air monitoring system. I would tell you, there is a market already now, but I agree with you, it has to be vivified. So first of all, indeed, there is the market of the green cities. I invite you to please become more vocal in the activities that we are carrying out across the European Commission to stimulate a number of green cities, also to embrace much more the air pollution, but in general, the Green Deal agenda. I expect that the market will become certainly more vivid once the new revised standards are adopted, because then we have really time-framed the trajectory to get there where we need to be. What matters very much to us is the reliability of the data. So I will not hide from you that we really look at the European Environment Agency as the key repository, and we want to strengthen the role of the European Environment Agency as the key data manager of air quality data. This is where all the monitoring stations of the European Union are currently reporting. We need solidity, reliability. So, we certainly welcome some level of citizen science that can be seen as a complementary source of information, but essentially what we want is that we measure and report back something as granularly as possible. The revision certainly is looking into how to do that better and fixes a number of parameters that will force the local authorities, this is partially a reply also to the question by CEFIC, to do more on investing in monitoring stations as such, in better placed, in more, how can I say, significant places to avoid risks of not monitoring there where we should be monitoring, in a nutshell. Collective redress, the question of the colleague. What do we have in mind? Well, it's years actually already now that, for example, for competition policy, much more recently for consumer affairs, we have a regulatory framework in place that tells in a nutshell that if you are, for example, the victim of misleading advertising done by Ryanair about the price of certain flights, just to pick an example. And many people enter into, contractual situation, but even simply take extra contractual steps that can bring them damage. Even just loss of time is recognized by the jurisprudence of the Court of Justice as a damage. You are entitled to seek compensation vis-a-vis this perpetrator of a breach of the consumer law key that says that in principle, no one should be misled in advertising across the European Union. And you can ask for damages, economic damages for that, but typically you don't need to act as an individual as such. You can go here in Belgium to test a SHA. If you are in Italy, Altro Consumo, there are consumer organizations that will act in your name and behalf, provided that you make it clear that you want to be part of their collective redress stream. So we are envisaging something similar for people that are victims of pollution problems that lead them to health issues. Exactly the example that was mentioned by Mrs. I mispronounced the names. Anna Stauffer, okay, from the Belgian health insurer organization, that knows facts and figures about how many children have been, brought to visit to their doctors because I suppose asthma, allergies, and other problems are appearing in certain zones. So this is what we have in mind. Then to the question on PFAS and so on, well, this is really very much what the zero pollution agenda is about. I encourage you to take a look. Basically, we are really trying to have an agenda that holistically tackles all the toxicity, which is not only air pollution, but of course also chemical pollution as such. And work is ongoing as we speak, actually, to adopt also further restrictions to the use of PFAS in non-essential uses. So stay tuned, because the Commission is going to adopt, I hope in the not too distant future, further decisions in that area as well. And next to that, we are activating PFAS restrictions, for example, through the revision also of the drinking water directive that we adopted some time ago. It's very, very important to limit the presence of PFAS, and EPR schemes, extended producer responsibility schemes, that will also bring some changes, we hope, across, for example, the pharmaceutical sector, the cosmetic sector, and others. Sefik had also asked some questions about enforcement. I think that when you look at the enforcement we're carrying out on air pollution, there is not so much we can be accused of, because indeed the Commission, in its role as guardian of the treaty, has been really very forceful. And even if the colleague from EPC was telling us, well, you've done a lot of cases and brought a lot of member states to the Court of Justice, you have still not found them. Well, first of all, I think that there are a couple of cases that could soon lead to that type of conclusion. But apart from that, I don't think that actually is what we want to do all the time. I mean, ideally, there certain things should not be happening in the first instance, and we need also much more implementation and vibrant enforcement by NGOs, in general, citizens, acting locally. In any event, happy to continue that conversation. And then on the return on investment question raised by someone online, I think the return of investment goes so fast, ultimately. First of all, we are really talking about costs that are not enormous, because many of them are eligible for European Commission co-funding. So we should seize the opportunities for as long as they're out there. But also we see that clean air brings to pretty fast transformation pretty soon. And I think the COVID-19 has been very telling in that period. I mean, I think most of us witnessed quite suddenly, the lot of benefits you can have, which are not just for public health. They really benefit, as I said, the agricultural system and so many other areas. So I stop here maybe just to say that, yes, I agree with those who are saying, shouldn't there be a much bigger role for doctors? Yes, there should be. And I know that I'm not alone in thinking that. So we have to unite forces to mobilize that category as well, which is so crucial to, first of all, alert and make our citizens better aware of the causality links.
Thank you very much. Yes, Stefan?
Yes, just to add on the monitoring, I would say indeed, like it makes sense to definitely invest more and put more efforts when it comes to the monitoring in cities, but also ports, for example. And there are regions, areas where definitely more can be done in this, and also to monitor areas in the cities, especially where lower income population and marginalized groups live, because that's where that's where people suffer the most, and it makes sense to invest, and that there is a public investment to help address and minimize the health impacts in that sense. Now, I mean, on the demand and on the procurement of monitoring equipment, I haven't come across any particular analysis and assessment on this, but one could imagine that if the rules become stricter on air quality standards, that would create a sort of a demand for procurement of this equipment over time. But of course, it's hard to say specifically how would that look like. But I would say that this needs to be coupled with enforcement. And also, like as mentioned by Veronica, there is definitely a lot can be done at the local level and at national, in front of the national courts. The collective redress is not something new, as you said. There is a consumer agenda already, and this case has been brought by consumer organizations or individually. The Industrial Emissions Directive also will strengthen. There are some new provisions also where the polluter will actually need to prove at some point that there is no pollution. I'm simplifying it a bit, but that would help with enforcement and in the judicial process. And I mean, yeah, I think the Commission with bringing the member states in front of the court is doing what it can, of course, within the framework of the EU and the founding treaties. And it's easier said than done to do this also because then we see with the Bulgarian case where they were brought again, and the European Court of Justice ruled that they can't. I mean, they can't actually then. They were not convinced at that point, but it's a back and forth and it's a process. And as I said, meanwhile, people are breathing polluted air. So that's something that also needs to be part of the picture, and that we think more broadly about our justice system and enforcement and judicial processes, bearing in mind these cases. Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to healthcare and air pollution quality, yeah, definitely more space, and that's something that we also addressed in the paper. Our colleague Danielle has been looking into this matter more closely, and we have also interesting good cases where hospitals do report and share this information about the effects of air pollution on health. You can see it on screens and so forth. There are these projects, but arguably more can be done to scale up and to train the healthcare professionals to make them aware, and because do you remember when, if you went to the doctor, if the doctor actually communicated something about this, they would focus on the local problem and they would not really try to bring in the bigger picture, the aspect. So yeah, I mean, that's nothing but to basically agree what was discussed. And one thing just to raise, I mean, as a think tanker, of course, I would like to also think about these things more broadly. And I think we also need to look at these bigger trends in a way. I mean, we talk about air pollution and the effects on our health and our lives at first, but also the economy because of the productivity. And let's just think about some trends. In terms of demography, European population is in decline, and it's an aging population, which is then impacted by air pollution. And we talk about an increasingly geopolitical world, geoeconomic world, where we may see potentially some shifts in terms of supply chains, regionalization, maybe even reindustrialization. It's hard to say, but we need to be ready for different scenarios. And, you know, like the air pollution is the clean air agenda is an important aspect in that sense, you know, because, you know, we may need to rely even more on our own local resources or our own industry, and we need workers, and we need to ensure that we are productive. I think health comes first and saving lives comes first. That should be already more than enough. But just in terms of the economy and financing, there is a case, and we need to look at the bigger, you know, picture in that sense. And in a way, I think the clean air agenda fits that we are ready, that we are resilient in that sense for new challenges that lie ahead.
Thank you, Stefan. And before I turn again to the raised hands we have online, I just want to also bring in a comment we had from online participants, which is about the ultra-fine particles, which have been mentioned, and which are not yet regulated, but that there are benefits of reducing them, which are not included in the cost-benefit analysis. So if anyone wants to comment also on that, please. But Robert, you had your hand raised to comment. Please, go ahead.
Yes, in response to the air quality monitoring question, I echo the response we've heard that the market is now, but I do agree that public procurement on some of these initiatives is proceeding rather slowly. Absolutely agree with Veronica's comment that data reliability is critical. It's essential to be able to use that data to promote action. I would like to stress the need to better support municipalities in understanding that this type of air quality monitoring is not just about installing the equipment. This is advanced instrumentation that needs to be operated, and they need support in interpreting the data in order to put it into good action. And I think there is work to be done in optimizing from a technical economic perspective such networks. Stefan just mentioned in better siting the equipment in order to maximize benefits, but also, again, alluding to my earlier comment, better combining instrumentation with modeling advances in order to have a more holistic and optimized approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. And Anne, please come in.
Thank you. Yes, a couple of comments, and thank you for the many points raised. Monitoring is also a key point for HEAL and our health network, and it's part of what I mentioned in the beginning of making sure we get a health protective package out of this AQG revision. And therefore, us, it's definitely key to see some improvements. So to see, on the one hand, continued monitoring at traffic hotspots, especially in cities, we know that traffic is a key contributor and a key threat to people's health, but at the same time, strengthening the monitoring to monitor at those places where frequented by people most at risk. So looking into monitoring in front of schools, around hospitals, and other places, and also making sure that with this revision, because we've also seen in the past, unfortunately, many, if I say it nicely, creative solutions by authorities to monitor in places where the pollution hasn't been high in order to bring down the overall results. So it's very important that we also making sure we monitor in the right places and down to the right level to understand the exposure of the population. But that shouldn't prevent us from taking action. So that's on that point. And combined with this monitoring, and this is also something, is the better information and communication of the population and also of health groups. And this links to what was said about the need to bring in more health groups and raise more awareness, because I think if we had clear and more information on the health risks associated with certain levels of pollution, especially for all of us, but especially for vulnerable groups. And if we have the clear alerts that also go with it in times of peak pollution, I think that would very much help for everyone to understand also the extent of the problem, especially since we don't, in most places, at least in Western Europe, we don't see the pollution anymore. So people think, they think we don't see it, there isn't a problem, but yes, there is. And especially we have much of a problem with also low levels. So, around monitoring and then communicating on the health risks. And there's very much a need with this update to harmonize the different ways of communication and on providing information to the public. And indeed, many doctors are not aware, and there's a need to also include this, air pollution and environmental pollution in the medical curriculum. Even though I have to say, I've worked on the topic of clean air for over a decade, and never before than now have so many health organizations been active. It's very much a topic, not only for the health insurers that I mentioned, for all the disease specialists, for the medical societies, for all the doctors associations in the countries at the European level, for the World Heart Federation, you name it. It's really across the health sector and diverse sector that people are concerned, and also very much with the patients. We recently had a visit of a patient to Brussels who told us about, she has severe asthma, and she told us about how air pollution is impacting her day. And that may also explain, Gillian, what you said earlier, that why is there not an outcry so much? Is that because some people, they simply are not able, because their health is affected in a certain way, to cry as loud as those who say, oh, you want me to forbid to use my car. But this is what health organizations, what the health sector is there for, to give a voice also to those who can't, or children. So it's also speaking up and highlighting the threat to those who are most affected. And I'm really appreciative that also as EPC, you have taken up this issue, and we continue to have a conversation, because I think that is very much what's needed to highlight what's at stake here and highlight how the revision of the Ambient Air Quality Directive is a much needed opportunity to very much improve people's life across the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, and being mindful of the time. I'm just trying to see if you have any last comments or burning issues you want to address. Yes, Veronica, please.
Just to clarify once again that our Clean Air Forum in Rotterdam is on the 23rd and 24th of November this year. So we are really looking forward to see you. I don't know, Gillian, when is the possible global air convention that you were mentioning? Because it sounds to be also November.
Yeah, it's November 24.
So it's back to back.
Back to back.
Very good.
Yes.
We have to find ways to orchestrate that cleverly, but really, please do come and follow, because it turns to be typically a very, very important moment for stock taking. And let's hope that some legislative progress will have been done by then. You never know. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this outlook. And then I just will conclude by saying thank you to all of you for your questions and your interventions on the panel. I think we tackled a lot of different issues. And just to say that we at the EPC, of course, will keep following this topic amongst all the other important topics under the Green Deal and for climate, energy and environment. And looking forward to also follow up projects on this topic, and hope to see all of you on our next discussions, and wish you a very nice day. Thank you all also to the online participants. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.